A Polish dive boat leaves port toward the furthest reaches of the Baltic Sea. The divers aboard are about to undertake a rare exploration of Nazi Germany's most mysterious warship. Today, the Graf Zeppelin is the holy grail of shipwrecks for divers and naval researchers. But for 60 years, what happened to the aircraft carrier was a mystery. In 2006, an oil exploration ship mapping the sea floor came across a massive steel object that turned out to be the long-lost Nazi aircraft carrier. This is the story of how it was built, sunk, and eventually found, more than half a century later. A new day begins in the Polish port of Gdynia, once home to the largest Nazi ship ever built, a place that plays a central role in the story of Hitler's Graf Zeppelin aircraft carrier. This is where it spent many years of the war, and this is the base of the Polish Navy unit that identified the wreck in 2006. The Graf Zeppelin aircraft carrier is seen by some as a wasted opportunity, and by others as yet another of Hitler's follies. But those who know it most intimately agree it was one of the mightiest Nazi warships ever. Adam Alieżnik is the Polish Naval Academy commander of the ROV unit that identified the ship.
Innej takiej na Bałtyku nie ma. To jest jedyny tego typu obiekt.
It was the only object that was around 2.5 times the size of a football field. It was shock, amazement, satisfaction that we could identify this object.
From the port, far out at sea, we saw this huge thing, and we asked, what is that? It was the aircraft carrier, Graf Zeppelin. We had never seen anything so big.
This is the last major German warship whose whereabouts was unknown. As such, there is historic value to it.
Dive master Łukasz Piórewicz is leading today's dive on the Graf Zeppelin wreck. He will go 80 meters below the surface of the Baltic Sea, using rebreathers, an advanced technology that allows divers to stay longer underwater at greater depths than ever before. His diving companion for many years, Łukasz Pastwa, joins him. The pair departs to join the rest of the team at a small port near Gdynia. Each team member checks his own equipment once again for safety. They are using the most advanced rebreathers, a technology that recycles oxygen, nitrogen and helium in a closed circuit, removing exhaled carbon dioxide, allowing divers to stay underwater for longer.
On such a deeps like 87 meters like Graf Zeppelin, diving on the upper circuit is very limited for the time because you exhaust all of the of the gases which you have in the tanks in the sea and on the air. Here we have this closed circuit system which keep the gas inside the loop over there. So you are saving greatly gas consumption. It's like 10 times or even more. The key point here is you always exhaust also the carbon dioxide. So you need to have the scrubber inside here, which thanks to the chemical absorption eliminates that poison gas.
On the other side of Europe, in England, Steve Burke is a diver and historian who was on the track of the Graf Zeppelin well before it was found. He too uses rebreathers.
The gas comes in from a canister in the back. There's a mixing canister at the back. I inhale it this way into this lung. You inhale it, you exhale it in, and then it goes back through the canister for the scrubber, and it's chemically scrubbed to remove the carbon dioxide. This is the mixing chamber. Okay, so that would obviously be connected to keep the water out. And in my particular machine, I've personalised it somewhat. So this cylinder's just for my suit inflate. As they come as standard, that would have the trimix in it.
You need to trust the rebreather that he give you exactly the mix what you want. And now in this moment we have really stable rebreathers. We are trust them, and of course we are ready for some kind of the problems. We are trained how to handle it with these problems. But the rebreathers give you a lot of good things. The first of all is time under the water. You can spend much more longer.
The Polish catamaran the team is using can berth 7 divers for the night and is particularly stable, a prerequisite for deep diving with heavy equipment. It takes 6 hours to get to the location above the Graf Zeppelin on the small boat. Advances in diving technology have enabled longer dives, but when the first private divers were allowed on the wreck in 2009, they were using the complex and cumbersome tri-gas system. Today, the crew is equipped with the most advanced rebreathers and heated dry suits. As the boat arrives on location, it drops anchor so the team can gather for a briefing about what they're about to see.
Okay guys, so we are on the position now. So we will split together as the 2 teams. The first going me, Tomek and Lucas. And really we don't know where we put the line. As you remember, the wreck is big. It's over 30 meters long, and wide something like 35 meters. So we know that the line is going around somewhere this area. Here we have a lot of the nets. Last time when we was here, we need to cut these nets. We need to make the entrance like that, okay?
Getting the dry suits on is laborious. The undervests are heated as the cold Baltic Sea is only 5 degrees centigrade. The group splits into 2. Łukasz goes down with the first group. The others watch for passing ships. Time is ticking. The dive will last 3 hours, counting 1 hour in all for decompression. The brackish water is rich in plankton, making it claustrophobic for divers, with visibility of only 7 meters. It is a plunge into the past. Hamburg, the Venice of the north, with its canals and warehouses, once the throbbing heart of Germany's maritime trade. This is home to the Peter Tam collection of nautical artifacts, the largest private collection in the world, gathered over decades. Objects hidden in the archives for years re-emerge, including extremely rare and fascinating original documents from the Graf Zeppelin. Gerrit Menzel is the curator of the museum.
Also zu dem Flugzeugträger Graf Zeppelin gibt's.
There is a lot from the Graf Zeppelin. We are lucky to have so much on that topic. We have a huge collection of ship photographs, we have the construction plans, and a very good model, and also models of the aircraft carrier aircraft that were constructed especially for the Graf Zeppelin. Of course, we also have various literature and stories.
Dazu haben wir natürlich auch Literatur, Zeichnungen.
In 1935, just 17 years after the Treaty of Versailles deprived Germany of a navy, Adolf Hitler forced Britain to allow Germany to build a fleet a third of the size of the Royal Navy. Hitler's so-called Plan Z was to give Germany a world-class navy by the 1940s, including 4 aircraft carriers.
Bekannt ist eine Haie-Denkschrift.
It is known that there was this grand plan, codeword Plan Z, that was supposed to develop over many years, not just from 1939, but far into the future, to build a huge navy with at least 8 aircraft carriers, including the Graf Zeppelin, along with the Carrier B, These were the first in an ambitious plan that eventually would prove unrealistic given the way the situation in Europe was developing at the time. Because at the end of the war, we had an unfinished navy that looked nothing like it was supposed to in the beginning.
Was wir nur eigentlich damit anfangen werden.
The first two Flugzeugträger, A and B, were begun in 1936. These top-secret technical specifications were the original plans. Some of these plans made it into Russian hands after the war. "Excellent machine," was noted in the margin by the Russian engineers. They are rare archival documents that few people have ever seen, though they may one day be displayed in the Hamburg Maritime Museum, where there is also a scale model of the Graf Zeppelin, kept safely behind glass. Even the aircraft that would have been deployed on the aircraft carrier have been reduced in minute detail. The Graf Zeppelin was actually built here, 150 kilometers away, in Kiel, Germany's foremost Baltic Sea port and the heart of its military shipbuilding industry. The Kiel Canal links the safe haven of the Baltic port with the North Sea and open Atlantic, as well as Hamburg. Ships built here, out of range of the Royal Navy, such as the mighty Bismarck and potentially also the Graf Zeppelin, could sail through the canal and take the British by surprise in the North Atlantic. The hull of the Graf Zeppelin was 262.5 meters long overall, the size of 2.5 soccer fields. It had a beam of 27 meters and a maximum draft of 7.6 meters, the general dimensions of a large cruise ship of today. It was planned to be home to 42 aircraft. At the time, it was the world's largest aircraft carrier. The flight deck was 244.5 meters long, with wooden planking covering the steel armor. There were two hangar decks, the upper and lower. The upper was 185 meters by 15 meters wide, the lower 171 by 15. It was an amazing machine. The Graf Zeppelin was powered by 4 Brown Boveri turbines, providing 200,000 horsepower, turning 4 propeller shafts, allowing for a top speed of 34 knots, or 63 kilometers per hour, making it faster than some of the most powerful cruise ships of today. With a 5,000-ton fuel oil capacity, her theoretical range would have been 15,500 kilometers. The Graf Zeppelin was launched with great fanfare on December the 8th, 1938. The 3 men who would mark the Graf Zeppelin's destiny were present. Adolf Hitler, absolute leader of Germany. Grand Admiral Erich Raeder, a veteran of World War I who was determined never to allow another naval blockade. And Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring, deputy leader of the Nazi Party and commander of the Air Force, who was determined never to allow the Navy to have aircraft.
Der erste deutsche Flugzeugträger soll auf Befehl des Führers Graf Zeppelin heißen. Fahre stets glücklich, stolze Schiff.
The guest book, signed by all 3 at the launch of the Graf Zeppelin, is also in the Peter Tamm Maritime Museum collection in Hamburg.
Wir haben eine Einladungskarte zur Schiffstaufe und das Gästebuch, das hier vor mir liegt.
We have an invitation to the launch and the guest book that lies here before me, where all the prominent officials who were at the launch signed. You can see all the signatures here, all the Nazi bigs. Göring is there, Hitler is there, and of course, the head of the German Kriegsmarine, Raeder, is also there.
Von der Kriegsmarine, der Großadmiral Raeder ist dabei.
Marcus Faulkner lectures on naval history at London University's King's College.
The aircraft carrier is an up-and-coming symbol of naval power. All the major navies, the British, the Americans, the Japanese, have been developing aircraft carriers, really from the tail end of the First World War. In addition, though, there is a specific German desire for aircraft carriers, and this stems from a problem, a fundamental problem that the German Navy has, which is its numerical inferiority. The purpose of a single carrier is to replace a squadron of light cruisers, which the Germans don't have, in providing reconnaissance for the main fleet, in this case the commerce-raiding warships of the Deutschland-class pocket battleships, or then later Scharnhorst, Gneisenau, and so on.
Since the Graf Zeppelin was expected to enter service in late 1939, the Air Ministry commissioned a design competition for a torpedo aircraft.
The most effective way of sinking an enemy ship is essentially to hit it where it is weakest, which means under its waterline, which means if you can get a torpedo into a relatively unarmored part of a warship, you're likely to gain the maximum damage.
The Fiesler Fi-167, a metal biplane, was found both to be extremely stable with low stall speeds and robust enough to carry more than the required weight in bombs and torpedoes. Only 14 examples were ever built. As war approached, Raeder asked for more modern aircraft for the Navy, and Göring, an ace fighter pilot obsessed with the air war, insisted that existing types were used. The rivalry between these two men created friction and competition between Hitler's Air Force and Navy. Hermann Göring, deputy leader of the Nazi Party, persuaded Hitler that adapted versions of the two most common aircraft in the Luftwaffe would do the job. The Ju-87 Stuka was the Luftwaffe's dive bomber, and the D variant had improved fuel capacity. For aircraft carrier deployment, it was given folding wings, a tailhook, and jettisonable undercarriage for emergencies. The variant known as D4 was also able to drop an 848-kilo torpedo. The Messerschmitt Bf 109E, with its Daimler-Benz DB601 engine, was adapted with folding wings, tailhook, and attachments for catapults that were being built onto the Graf Zeppelin. The fighter's 300-kilometer combat radius would have given the Graf Zeppelin the ability to control 90,000 square kilometers of sea. The Graf Zeppelin had something no other aircraft carrier in the world did: twin catapults on the forward flight deck. These were 20 meters long and could accelerate airplanes to 135 kilometers per hour. They are still visible underwater.
This was a novel way of doing things. No other navy experimented with this method, quite simply because most other navies had evolved their fighter components. Nobody had done this from scratch. We do not know if these catapults would work. We shouldn't forget that aircraft carriers are the most complex warship around, one in which it's vitally important that all its component parts actually function properly. So the Graf Zeppelin represents the sort of the sum total of experimental components that the Germans are putting together at the time.
Although the carrier was designed to have 8 15mm guns for operations without aircraft, these were eventually removed, and the wreck at the bottom of the Baltic Sea is a steel giant without its weapons. These circular gun emplacements were to have hosted the massive artillery that would have made the Graf Zeppelin a menace for the very survival of Britain. Today, 70 years after its final sinking, the Graf Zeppelin's formidable steel construction has survived the wear and tear of time. The wooden flight deck and the catapults are still very much as they were when the ship sank, thanks to the low salinity and cold temperature of the Baltic Sea. It is impossible to explore the whole massive 260-meter long wreck in a single dive.
When we reached the wreck when he was on the Graf, we tried to realize where we are, and there was just the big wreck, the big platform, the wooden platform, and that was something new for us. Yes, but the wreck is also really interesting because from the bottom to the highest point is around 20 meters, so it's like a big building, and except that is a really white one.
1939. Europe was hurtling towards another war. First Austria, then the German-speaking Czech region of the Sudetenland were annexed by Nazi Germany, with Czechoslovakia itself seized not long afterwards. When Hitler invaded Poland, Britain and France declared war. Hitler's Plan Z was abandoned, and the material being used to construct battleships was instead used for submarines, known as U-boats. The aircraft carrier Graf Zeppelin languished in the Kiel shipyards, where the U-boats were being rapidly built in numbers.
It's not until the British start long-range photo reconnaissance flights over the central and eastern Baltic that they actually have a first-hand glimpse of the Graf Zeppelin itself. And the issue is, well, what happens when the Germans bring out an aircraft carrier? And it's quickly identified that if the Germans complete an aircraft carrier and bring her out into the Atlantic, it's going to change the dynamics considerably.
The initial successes of the Kriegsmarine put Britain on the defensive. During the German invasion of Norway, the battle cruisers Gneisenau and Scharnhorst sank the British aircraft carrier Glorious, while U-boats sank the battleship Royal Oak and the aircraft carrier Courageous. When the Nazis occupied France, they had the whole Atlantic seaboard under their control. Now their ships and U-boats could threaten a blockade of Britain. In July 1940, the British lost track of the Graf Zeppelin as it was towed from Kiel to Gdynia, or Gotenhafen as the Germans called it, where it remained until Germany invaded Russia. Steve Burke found a member of the Graf Zeppelin crew who was on the ship during that voyage.
Guten Morgen.
Guten Morgen.
August Brunmeier told Burke about his time as a light infantryman assigned to the Kriegsmarine. He was based in Kiel on the Ostsee Canal when he got the call to come to the station with just a light pack.
Ja, dort sind wir hingekommen, da sind circa so 100 oder 150 Mann zusammengekommen.
So we went there, and there were 140 men came together, and we were taken to the train station and put in a coach. We had no idea why or where we were going, but we eventually noticed we were heading in direction east. Then we arrived in Gotenhafen, and we were put on a ferry. We could see this huge thing, and we said, "What is that?" It was the aircraft carrier, Graf Zeppelin. We had never seen anything that big.
Ganz in der Ferne, da haben wir dann so ein großes Ding gesehen. Ja, was ist das? Ja, das ist der Flugzeugträger Graf Zeppelin. Also, so was Großes haben wir nie gesehen.
The British did not know where the Graf Zeppelin was until these aerial photographs of the ship in Gdynia port were taken by British reconnaissance aircraft nearly 18 months later, just before it was sent back to Kiel for completion.
Wir mussten dann Munition übernehmen und Vierlingsflak und so weiter. Das ist alles.
We had to take over the munitions and mount all the anti-aircraft artillery machinery and put everything in order. Then we were told that the ship would be towed to Kiel for further construction, and we had to take over the anti-aircraft artillery defense in the case that there would have been an attack on the aircraft carrier.
Angriffe auf den Flugzeugträger stattfinden würden.
The story of the Graf Zeppelin is closely tied to the story of the German-occupied port of Gotenhafen, or Gdynia today. The city was built by Poland after Danzig, or Gdansk, was declared an independent city. The Graf Zeppelin was berthed here in the military port near the container terminal. right in front of what is today the office of Adam Olieżnik, the Polish Navy officer who commanded the first ROV inspection of the ship.
I w pewnym momencie
One day I got this telephone call telling me that they wanted to organize a research ship to identify a new wreck.
Związanego z identyfikacją nowo odkrytego wraku. Z informacją, że to jest prawdopodobnie Graf Zeppelin.
That they told me was probably the Graf Zeppelin.
Pomyślałem sobie znowu, ponieważ była taka sytuacja.
My first reaction was, again? Because we'd been identifying wrecks already in 2006. We'd been doing it since 2003.
Today, the wreck is one of the most sought-after dives for experienced deep-water divers like Łukasz and his team. Except for the marine life that inhabits it and the damage from its sinking, the Graf Zeppelin is exactly as it was in 1945, a ghostly reminder of Hitler's delusions of grandeur. As the war entered its second year, the rivalry between the two Nazi military leaders, Erich Raeder, head of the Navy, and Hermann Göring, head of the Air Force, intensified. Despite the Kriegsmarine's successes, threatening Britain's lifeline, and the Luftwaffe's failure to bring Britain down by air power alone, Hermann Göring still demanded control of anything that flew, and remained blind to the aircraft carrier's potential ability to interrupt supplies to Britain and Russia. When Hitler ordered the invasion of Russia, it became clear that resources for the Air Force would be given priority.
Raeder's position comes under increasing strain, and after the German invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941, naval armaments, although initially prioritized, are simply never going to have the same amount of material being devoted to them as the army, because it is fighting on the Eastern Front. So really after the Soviet counteroffensive in the winter, or December of 1941, throughout the winter, 41-42, from that point onwards it's very clear that the Navy is simply not going to get the material necessary.
The first air raid from aircraft carriers was carried out by the British against the Italian fleet in Taranto, southern Italy, in November 1940, when 3 squadrons of Swordfish biplanes severely damaged the Italian surface fleet. A year later, just as Germany was fighting to capture Moscow, far away in the Pacific, on the 7th of December 1941, 6 Japanese aircraft carriers attacked Pearl Harbor, bringing the United States into the war. However, Hitler had already truly realized the damage aircraft carriers could do 6 months earlier, when his mighty battleship Bismarck was crippled in the North Atlantic by a direct hit from a single torpedo, dropped by an antiquated Swordfish aircraft that had flown from the British carrier HMS Ark Royal. After a sustained battle with the Royal Navy, the Bismarck sank the following morning on May the 27th, 1941, taking more than 2,000 men down with her.
In a sense, from a German perspective, rather than Taranto or Pearl Harbor being really key moments, it's really the loss of the Bismarck that is the wake-up call. Because the Bismarck sortie into the Atlantic had really demonstrated the value that aircraft carriers had, that theoretical value that everybody knew they had, but in the ability to cover ocean space and to cripple a very modern battleship.
By 1942, Hitler recognized the need to stop the Allied Arctic convoys to Russia and ordered construction on the Graf Zeppelin to continue.
In parallel to the photo reconnaissance, there's a small amount of signals intelligence which suggests that the Luftwaffe is still putting together and training pilots for service on an aircraft carrier.
At the same time, 3 German capital ships managed to slip through the English Channel to the North Atlantic under the nose of the Royal Navy. Concerned about the Graf Zeppelin's deadly potential, the British tried to sink the aircraft carrier in Gdynia.
In August of 1942, Bomber Command launches its longest raid to date. The fact that the British are willing to risk an extreme long-range bomber mission to take out a German capital ship says something about the way that the Admiralty sees the Graf Zeppelin as a threat.
The loss of a German destroyer during a failed interception of an Arctic convoy at the end of December 1942 made Hitler change his mind once again.
Hitler has for a number of years now been pushing radar, been pushing the Navy to employ vessels on the one hand in a more aggressive manner to attain greater results, but on the other hand not to risk them, not to risk their crews. And this is an intractable position. And eventually warships are lost. And this is ultimately what causes radar to tender his resignation. By this stage, German shipyards are working primarily on U-boats, on repairing what remains of the surface fleet, and there simply isn't the material, not only in the shipyards, but within the Third Reich, to finish the aircraft carrier project.
The ship was moved from vulnerable Kiel to Poland, this time to Stettin, and eventually to the mouth of the Parnitz at Swinemünde, today's Schweineuoschen, where it housed timber and other supplies needed by the German forces occupying Poland. The anti-aircraft gun crews continued to defend the ship.
Ablauf, der war eigentlich so, ständige Bereitschaft am Geschütz.
There was regular duty on defense, then we had to get to know the other troops and learn to work together, because the entire defense crew had never worked together before. They were all from different areas. One was from here, one was from there, and they had to try to practice together.
Und so weiter. Aber es ging da eigentlich ganz.
It was all pretty loose. Sure, we had some drills, and we had to make sure that everything was functioning and all the parts fit together. But otherwise, well, what can I say? It was a bit like a cruise ship voyage.
Man könnte sagen, es war eine Schiffsreise.
German human and material resources were now being pushed to their limits, as fighting on the Eastern Front demanded more resources, and Allied bombing was beginning to impact production. The Germans had lost the key battles of Stalingrad and Kursk. By 1944, the Third Reich was in full retreat on all fronts. When Red Army forces neared Stettin in April 1945, the ship's German crew was ordered to scuttle the Graf Zeppelin. At 6 p.m. on the 25th of April 1945, just as the Russians entered Stettin, the charges were detonated. Later, it was subject to inspection by Russian and British experts.
The Graf Zeppelin represents a certain technical and political curiosity, if you will. But by this stage, she's in a very wrecked condition, and the British team that inspects her finds her to be in a very poor state, and as a result assesses her as wrecked beyond repair, of no interest to us. And as far as we can ascertain, the British do not have any particular interest in the Graf Zeppelin beyond that stage. They're quite happy to let the Soviets take control of her and tow her away for salvage, as the wreck for salvage at a later stage.
As this secret book of plans shows, Russian engineers began studying the plans of the aircraft carrier as they had none in their fleet. It posed a great threat and a great opportunity. The United States and Britain both had aircraft carriers. Now, the Russians had both the plans and the damaged carrier.
The Soviets certainly find her as a prize. She also represents an opportunity to learn something. The Soviets are just as interested as the British or the Americans are in understanding German naval technology, even more so because the Soviets are coming from a position of knowing even less, not only about aircraft carriers specifically, but about the whole range of naval subjects. And after all, the Germans have made advances in many areas.
In 1946, Russian mariners raised the Graf Zeppelin and towed it away. Total silence. But the mystery fascinated Steve Burke, who continued to look for clues.
We went to the local college and sat in a Russian class, and we got their most advanced student to translate a letter for me, which we sent off to a Russian archive. And then this letter came, and it came in an envelope. I always remember coming home from work, and it says on the front, Defence, Air Attaché, unclassified, stamps all over both sides. And I remember my mum was really, really concerned. She's like, what the hell have you done?
The letter revealed the location where the Soviet Navy had sunk the Graf Zeppelin. It was the first ray of light shed on the 60-year-old mystery. But it was still not enough to find the ship.
We opened it, and of course, it's this letter in Russian. I could see what looked to be coordinates, but I didn't know what any of the letter said, so we then had to go back and track those same guys down and had to have the reverse, have it translated. And of course, they'd give us a position, and the letter essentially says that the ship was disposed of after World War II as weapons target.
A grainy photograph of the sinking of the Graf Zeppelin that appeared in a Russian magazine proved a valuable clue to help Berg calculate where he believed the mysterious Nazi aircraft carrier might lie.
And we were able to get copies of this really, really grainy picture, which you might not be able to see, of the carrier sinking. And this was published in a Russian magazine. And we was able to roughly calculate that with the ship at that angle, unless it snapped, it wasn't touching the bottom yet, or it was only just touching the bottom. It wasn't in 60 metres of water. So by drawing a line away, we guessed about how far it had drifted, and we figured it had to be in about 90 metres of water. And this area on the map, where I'm pointing here, we've got 73 metres, 68 metres, 90 metres, 88 metres. And the point where we plotted it to was here. And we were within about a quarter of a kilometre, half a mile maybe, of where the wreck was lying, where the wreck was found.
Steve Berg's plan to be first on the wreck, however, was frustrated by fate. For 60 years, the Graf Zeppelin lay rusting silently, waiting to be discovered. In 2006, an exploration ship, the Santa Barbara, owned by Petro Baltic, was mapping the sea floor in preparation for the construction of a huge oil platform. Andrea was at the sonar controls when he and the team saw something that could not possibly be a natural phenomenon.
Czy kiedykolwiek widziałem tak duży obiekt? Nie, w swojej karierze pomiarowej nie widziałem aż tak dużego.
In my whole career, I've never seen an object that big. It was a shock not only for me, but also for my colleagues who were on the ship with me, who were members of the measurement team.
The position of the wreck, 41 nautical miles north of the Rozhevye lighthouse, at the base of the Hel Peninsula, suggested that it might be a relic of the Second World War. It was too large to be a trawler or a submarine.
Of course, the first consultations in the measurement room, I can call it like that, were between us. We were laughing, I had no idea, and we joked, we found Noah's Ark.
Petro Baltic immediately informed the Polish Navy headquarters in Gdynia, the port that had been home to the giant Nazi ship for many months during World War II. The Polish Navy turned to Adam Alieżnik, their senior remotely operated vehicle expert at the Naval Academy.
Już byliśmy spakowani i ze sprzętem załadowanym na pokładzie jednostki.
We were packed on the ship, and we had a plan of the ship from the archives from a specific date.
Dane historyczne. To jest o tyle ważne, że istotne jest, jak się zakotwiczy jednostkę, z której będzie...
It's really important to know exactly where you are when investigating a wreck with an ROV, because it's like being an ant on an elephant.
Pomocą kamery umieszczonej na pojeździe ROV to jest tak, jakbyśmy chcieli sobie obejrzeć słonia, wykorzystując do tego mrówkę.
The Polish Navy deployed its most advanced ROV with virtual reality controls. It explored the length of the ship, looking for identification signs, photographing up and down the survey grid like a farmer ploughing a field to create a mosaic map.
W Bałtyku jest ten problem, że to jest morze, które nie sprzyja.
We have this problem in the Baltic Sea because it's a sea that's not very friendly for filmmakers. Visibility is not good. There's a lot of suspension. We know that we need to get close to film small parts of the wreck, in order to identify this kind of object, we need to have detailed plans.
Posiadać dosyć szczegółowe plany.
Apart from using the most advanced technology available to the Polish Navy, including 3D exploration by ROV operators wearing special goggles, Adam Olieżnik also spent many hours in the archives to match what he was seeing with historical data. The 3.5 hours of ROV footage clearly showed the anti-aircraft gun emplacements that confirmed this was indeed the Graf Zeppelin. There was considerable damage from internal explosions.
Mamy dowódca rejsu, ja akurat i plany Grafa Zeppelina i zaczynamy rozmawiać właśnie, że to jest chyba ten wrak.
The manager and I were there with the plans of the Graf Zeppelin, and we started saying that this is probably the wreck, because lots of elements and fragments show us that it cannot be anything else. There is nothing else like it in the whole of the Baltic Sea. It's the only object that's around 2.5 times the size of a football field. It was shock, amazement, satisfaction that we could identify this object.
Satysfakcja też się pojawiła, że udało się taki obiekt.
One man had more information than anyone else. It was, of course, Steve Burke, who already had a good idea of where he believed the Graf Zeppelin was.
Once the wreck itself was found, I saw those beautiful side scan images that the Polish Navy produced, and I saw Adam Olieżnik's name on the bottom. So I just wrote to Adam, and we ended up going to meet. I got to stand on the pontoon. It's now a NATO harbour, but where Graf Zeppelin was moored for a long time. And we had a really good chat about that, and I shared information with Adam which he didn't know.
Mamy jedno zdjęcie okrętu podczas jego postoju w Gdyni, w basenie portowym.
We have a picture of this ship when it was in Gdynia, and it's in what we call berth number 8 in Gdynia. And the funny thing is that my colleague Stephen sent me this picture and asked me if this place still exists in Gdynia.
Kolega Steven przysłał mi to zdjęcie z pytaniem, gdzie jest to miejsce w Gdyni i czy ono jeszcze w ogóle istnieje.
And I answered him that I could see the place through my window because I work near the place, and I could see the place where the Graf Zeppelin was in 1942.
Przez moje okno widać to miejsce, gdzie stał w 1942 roku Graf Zeppelin w Gdyni.
As the largest wreck ever found on the floor of the Baltic Sea, the fascinating Nazi aircraft carrier was bound to become the object of adventure diving. So the Polish Navy had to make sure it was safe by checking for explosives and assessing stability of the wreck. It was lit by 4 underwater floodlights as divers descended on it to determine, was it safe?
Dopiero potem zaczęły się jakby rozważania na temat tego, czy ten wrak można udostępnić.
After this, we were planning to allow recreational dives on the wreck. The deciding body is the Civil Sea Administration, which decides whether or not to give access to tourists. When we decided this, we needed to check the wreck to make sure it was safe for non-professional divers. So we needed to do a dive survey of the wreck, just to check that the wreck was safe for non-military divers.
Polegającą na tym, żeby sprawdzić, czy wrak dla nurków niemilitarnych, nieprofesjonalnych, dla turystów jest bezpieczny.
The divers examined the wreck of the largest German fighting ship of the Second World War. It was designed to threaten the navies of the free world, but remained a ghostly presence for the whole of the war until it mysteriously disappeared 2 years after the end of the devastating conflict.
Znaczy, uszkodzony najbardziej jest dziób okrętu. Tak jakby tego dziobu nie było.
The biggest damage is on the hull. It's like part of the hull has disappeared, but the rest of the ship is fine. For me personally, the biggest shock was to see how well preserved the wooden planks are, because it's so beautiful. You'll see this in the movie that I gave you. This was the biggest shock for me, that after so many years underwater, this wood is in such good condition. There are so many bent and twisted elements that show the ship was bombed inside, but in different areas.
Świadczą o tym, że jednostka była ostrzelana, bombardowana, że były też wybuchy, które jakby rozrywały kadłub od środka.
Meanwhile, the divers return to the surface. The amazing exploration of the wreck has allowed them to observe once again the gigantic secret weapon of the Third Reich, which many believe could have changed the course of the war at sea, had it ever been used as intended.
From the beginning, the wrecks was just the place where we can go for a dive. And after that, from these dives, it became a little bit more interesting, because we find some wrecks, we dive on them, but after that we want to know the name of the ship, the history of the ship. So that developed a little bit, and from over 10 years, we try to find another wrecks. We try to make some investigation about the history.
With today's advanced diving technology, maritime engineers and historians will soon be able to study the bridge, the engine rooms, and the many still sealed chambers, shedding first light on what lies deep inside Nazi Germany's most powerful war machine. The crew returns home after an intense dive. The team split up after a long day and say goodbye before heading their separate ways. The sun sets on Gdynia, once home to the Graf Zeppelin and its crew, today home to an intrepid crew of divers who have come to know the lost ship inside and out after it was finally discovered on the bottom of the Baltic Sea.